my role as an educator, I like to do a few interactive activities to get people thinking. These are really simple. I'll do something like make a simple statement and ask people to raise their hand if it rings true to them. I'm not going to ask you to do that today, but I would invite you to think about your responses. I usually use some variation of the following. Raise your hand if a teacher or professor ever outwardly cried in class out of sadness about something they were teaching. Or if a classmate ever outwardly expressed outrage or anger over something they were learning in class. Or if your boss or supervisor ever expressed to you or your team something that brought them embarrassment or a joyful moment that they had learned from. The intent of this exercise is to show how difficult it can be for us to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable means to be open and to express our emotions. Being vulnerable is more than just being sad, crying, anger, happy, embarrassed. It can be any expression of ourselves. However, we're often told not to express our vulnerability. And that's why I see so few hands raised sometimes when I do this activity. We're told to not show our emotions in the classroom or in the workplace. We're told to be professional, and that's often defined as stoic. We often fear that if we express our joy, our sadness, our anger, our embarrassment, we will look weak, unprofessional, or silly. We are often taught to hide our true selves and to be people pleasers. I know that I was. When I was learning to be a teacher, we were taught to be in charge of our class. We were told never to be too friendly with them, not to be too connected, but to be in control of them. I think the same is true of our emotions in other settings and other professions. Sometimes we're also told to chill, make it look like we got it all together. As Brené Brown, a speaker, author, and TED presenter, expressed, sometimes we grow up in get her done or suck it up cultures. This tenacity, this resilience can be really helpful in life, but maybe not so much when we're navigating the emotions of uncertain times. And there's definitely uncertainty today. We don't always have it all together. I know I do not. But I've learned, still learning, that is okay. When we share our true selves, our true emotions, whatever way they manifest, and as messy as they sometimes may be, we invite each other to do the same. This can be hard. People are afraid to do this sometimes, but yet it can be powerful. In fact, I think it can be life-changing. What if we embrace our vulnerability instead of fear it? What if we all felt comfortable sharing our emotions in whatever setting? What I've come to learn as I've navigated my life and my career is that vulnerability is important. And instead of fearing it, we should embrace it and its important role in building human connections. When we share how we truly feel, people are more interested and attentive. When we expose our emotions, people feel more comfortable with us. And when they're more comfortable with us, we can forge deep connections. Those deep connections make us care. And when we care about others, we want to do better for them. When we share our vulnerability and make those human connections, we can move towards a better place where everybody is treated with dignity, kindness, and respect. And I think we need that today. I think we can all agree we need that today. Another exercise I like to do in class is a vision exercise, and we can do that one right now. I invite you to close your eyes and imagine a more peaceful and just world. A world where everybody felt free and safe and healthy and loved. You can open your eyes, but I invite you to keep that vision in your mind. I contend that the vision that many of us are conjuring up can best begin when we start by being open and vulnerable. When we begin to embrace our vulnerability, I believe it has a domino effect, like a pathway to a more peaceful and just world. So I'm going to contend that that pathway looks like this. vulnerability to mindfulness, mindfulness to empathy, empathy to human connections, and human connections to inspiring action. I've seen this pathway in my teaching and in my life, and I bet you have too, and you will continue to when you open yourself up to do so. So I'm a lifelong educator. I have taught high school social studies, I've taught future teachers, I ran a summer camp, I've taught peace studies, gender studies, I was a gypsy at every adjunct university you can imagine early in my career, teaching every subject they'd allow me to teach. And what I have found in all these experiences is that this pathway holds true. One of the most important things I've seen through all these experiences is the power of being authentic. To show up fully, to be truly who you are, and to be vulnerable, whatever that looks like. So, I have to be honest. I cry. Like, not just like shed a tear, like straight up lose it. Several times a semester. I also have been known to belly laugh and snort in class when something made me giggle or was really, touching. I have shared embarrassing moments from when I was a naive young high school teacher. I've shared how pissed I am about some of the policies and laws that I teach about in my class. And, hey, in all honesty, as the Imelda Marcos of costumes and wigs, I have been known to show up in class in a costume and wig and break into song if levity was needed in the moment. So the first times I was this vulnerable, I was really embarrassed. I thought all those things I was told would be true, that I would be judged, I would be considered silly or unprofessional, that I would be dismissed at or laughed at, or that my exuberance or my enthusiasm or my anger or my embarrassment would just be too much. Being vulnerable was scary. But in those moments, none of that came true. In fact, I found that people connect with me more when I share my emotions. People see me as a real person with real concerns. My students see me as a real person with real concerns. And that invites them to connect more deeply with me. Learning, regardless of the setting, is inevitably a vulnerable space. I found that when I show that I'm vulnerable, it creates a safe space for others to be as well. And that's where real learning happens. So after seeing how this vulnerability transformed my students' learning and caring, I began to research a little bit more about it. So I researched teaching with vulnerability, reviewing teachers' stories, reviewing scholarly literature. I watched some awesome TED Talks. And I found, of course, I'm not the only person talking about this. Brené Brown, who I mentioned earlier, talks about how when we show our vulnerability, we are seen as more authentic. David Rockour, as author of a book called Teaching with Vulnerability, shows how taking those emotional risks in class engages students. Janice Omodeke, who's a speaker and author as well, talks about how when we are vulnerable, we can create safe workplaces. We can create those workplaces that people feel comfortable being their own selves, and to take risks, and to be more creative, and to have their unique contributions accepted and appreciated. All that research affirmed to me that the power of vulnerability, and that is the beginning of this pathway to create that more peaceful world. One of the most powerful ways that we can show our vulnerability is through stories. So I researched this as well, because I like to tell my stories, but let's see if others think the same. And indeed they do. Jeremy Bruner, a cognitive psychologist, says that we are 22 times more likely to remember information when it is embedded in a story. A study by the London Business School found that when we hear stories, we can increase retention rates of information up 65 to 70%. But we want people to do more than just retain information. We want them to deeply reflect upon it, to think about its implications, and, if appropriate, feel empowered that they can make social change to better whatever the issue we're discussing. So I have loved seeing the transformation of my students' learning, caring, and action when I've taught with my vulnerable self. But if we think about it, some of the most influential change agents in world history have done exactly this. They've shared emotional stories to show us a path forward. Think, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. He levied the power of his emotional storytelling to champion others to get involved in the fight for civil rights that we benefit from today. So vulnerability is obviously powerful. It opens minds, it builds connections, and inspires action. But to have a lasting impact, we need to be mindful. People need to be in the moment. When we share emotion, we invite people to be present with us, to listen to us, and engage with us. And I believe that's the next step in the path that I described. So in my teaching and in my life, I teach a lot about domestic and dating violence, really difficult subjects. And I've done that a long time. So I can tell statistics all day long. But I found that when I tell stories, it touches people differently. One story that I use is about a woman who was murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend on the day that she was to wed another man. Every time I tell this story, and I've told it a lot, I cry. I cry because I'm sad, and I cry because I'm outraged that something like that would happen on what's supposed to be such a beautiful day. How does my audience react to that story? Well, they're definitely in the moment. They are engaged. They're sad, appalled, but engaged and eager to learn more. They're not just responding to the story. They're responding to the vulnerable way in which I share this story. And I found that to be more impactful than any data or statistics I can share about dating and domestic violence. So mindfulness is important. It allows people to stay present, to listen, and to absorb. But people also need to care. And this is where empathy comes in. When people are engaged, they don't just hear you, they feel with you. And that feeling then moves us to act. I can pull from my own life a story of someone I love. I was teaching a unit on poverty and homelessness in class. And the moment I got to class and uttered the word homelessness, I broke down and cried. Because just the day before, my best friend had lost his home. He had become homeless. I've never had to personally deal with housing insecurity, but it hit real close to home. So how did my students respond to that? I mean, I was losing it. They cried with me. Some of them hugged me. They asked about him in subsequent classes. This story moved them, and they expressed empathy to my vulnerability. This story put a face to homelessness for some of them. Some of them even expressed, modeling my vulnerability, that they had felt shame when they once had couch surfed, or when their family was close to losing their home because of the cost of living. But this story allowed even those folks who had had experiences that would technically make them be homeless to step into my friend's shoes and see it from a different perspective. Human connections forge through vulnerability, help move us forward. And here I share a personal story. I was continuing to teach this unit on poverty and inequality, and once again, lost it in class. So in July of 2020, I was in a bad car accident. This car accident left me being pulled out of my car by the jaws of life, broken bones in several places, lots of out-of-pocket bills. I share this story to show that many of us are just one major accident or crisis away from serious financial struggle. My students connected to me on that story. They saw that I'm not just their professor, but I'm somebody who deals also with real issues that we are discussing in class. Those meaningful bonds strengthen our connection, that pathway I mentioned before. When I teach that issue statistically, I don't think the students are as mindful. I don't think it lands as emotionally. But when I tell the story, they are attentive and empathetic. That story helps them move from being empathetic to being more connected, and those connections go from beyond informing to inspiring. When we relate to a story, we can care, and when we care, we want to take action. So I've been sharing examples of when I've used sadness in my class. I'm not always sad, I promise. But, there are other ways to express our vulnerability. One of those is anger and outrage. We can move people to action, but only if they witness our anger and outrage about some social injustice. So I came to class another day, really angry. I'd been working with a domestic violence survivor as a volunteer at a nonprofit organization, and we had learned she was unable to pay for her daughter's dental care. This was due to the abuse the daughter had endured by her father since she was an infant. When I shared my outrage at that story, my students felt it. They felt for this woman and her struggle. And unbeknownst to me, they passed around a basket to collect some funds to help her pay for the daughter's dental care. This was a woman they didn't know, and these were college students who didn't have a whole lot to spare, but they cared about me, they cared about the issue, and they cared about this woman. So I've been sharing examples from my classroom, but I see examples of this all the time. For instance, you tell a colleague that you're struggling financially and they start a GoFundMe to help you out. Kids who have cancer and they tell their peers and the peers start a lemonade stand to raise money. Outraged people in communities who start social movements to make change on issues that they care about. I believe that vulnerability is not just valuable, it's necessary. And stories are a powerful way to embrace it. We have to allow all of ourselves to be seen, to share openly. This builds those deep, authentic connections that inspire the action. It transformed my classroom, not just in how I show up, but how we show up for each other. I invite you to share your stories and to see how others react. This can be tough, so maybe start small. Something you're honestly struggling with. As Janice Omadeke said, those personal confessions are powerful tools. See how much deeper your connections may be. See how much more people feel compelled to help. I think they will. And I believe this is the path forward to achieve that world we want.